Good afternoon to everyone, and even good evening to people across the globe. So I hope you guys are staying safe in this pandemic. And hey, yeah. So my name is Sudha. So I'm a test architect. I've been working, building and maintaining test automation frameworks for both front-end and back-end applications for like 8 years now. And I would also like to second every word that Ed just said, because as a QA engineer, when you say like, is it okay to be spending more time in writing automation test code? I would say no, definitely a no, because in my organizations, it's like a big challenge to kind of validate a user story. I mean, manually test a user story and also to automate it simultaneously in the same sprint. So we actually call it a sprint goal, but in reality, it is never, something which we were able to do, because by the time we manually test it and start automating, the sprint is already gone because we spend a lot of time automating a user story. So I'd say like as automation test engineers or QA engineers, we look for every chance that would help us save time and to write code and to kind of complete a user story, the automation part of the user story, the test scenario within the same sprint. And yeah, that is when I really got a chance to use Testenium. And when I actually was a happy user, I thought like I should get into the sessions that Testenium has been hosting. So yeah, that was my experience that got me into Testenium as a very satisfied user. So in today's session, I thought like I'll share my experience and knowledge of what an API is, what's API, and about API testing. We'll just go and see how the APIs are being tested in the current world. So just to get started, what is an API? As we all know, it's an application programming interface, which is a logic that is written in any programming language, say Java or C# or PHP, like any programming language. And this logic acts as a mediator between two software applications to communicate between each other. It helps two applications to kind of talk to each other, and the API is being a mediator or a centerpiece of logic. So let's think of scenarios where we kind of register ourselves to an application, or we book an Uber cab, we kind of purchase stuff online, or we book flight tickets. So in all these day-to-day scenarios, we actually have a number of APIs used in the backend. So behind the scenes, for all these scenarios, it's nothing but APIs being called. So it is nothing but a piece of code or a set of code written by someone in a company, and anybody can use it. Any third-party company can use it. I mean, referring it to be an open source API. For example, I'm trying to build a software application where I have this requirement of user authentication. So instead of hiring resources, or instead of me as a developer writing a piece of code for this, I can simply go and use a Google's API or a Facebook's API for user authentication. So you might have seen this happening in many applications where you try to get yourself registered. And when you log into their application, a pop-up appears. It's nothing but a list of possible authentications, like possible ways of having yourself authenticated. For example, you might see a Google login, you might see a Facebook login. These are like commonly found logins. And you can authenticate yourself using these logins. For example, if you click on a Google login, it will ask for your Google ID and password. And when you're successfully authenticated, it will actually take you to the third party's dashboard. So simply, these third party companies are using Google's API and Facebook's API to authenticate their users. So instead of writing a code to authenticate, they simply use and procure these APIs. So that is the significance of having APIs in the world. So one more best example that I was able to think on top of my head is simply booking a flight ticket. So, for example, if you're looking to book a flight ticket with British Airlines, not all of us nowadays, like we have this habit of going to BA website. We simply go and use these third-party applications or sites like Make My Trip or Cleartrip or Expedia to book our tickets. So why do we actually do that? It's simply because we just not only get to see British airline tickets, but we have a comparison of all the tickets, like a comparison of the cost, the comparison of route. So we try to explore more with these third-party applications. But these online travel agencies, or what we call OTAs, they simply use APIs. provided by different airlines. For example, Make My Trip would make number of calls to British Airlines API, to APIs by Indian Airlines, to API by Gulf. So it just connects with these APIs and it simply procures their data, and they process this data and then they put this data in their own user interface. And this is what we see in the front end. So while I was talking about APIs, I thought like it would be really nice if we understand what is a three-layer architecture of a software application. So talking about a three-layer architecture, so I would say the first layer or the topmost layer. Sorry, okay, yeah. I'm hearing some interference. Can you all please be on mute? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, coming back to a three-layer architecture of a software application, I was saying like the first layer or the topmost layer is a presentation layer. It's nothing but, for example, in a Make My Trip website, it's a front end, it's the user interface, what we see, where when we give the route, the from route, the to route, the price range, etc. So it's basically the front end, which is the presentation layer. And then comes the main layer, the second layer, which is the middle layer, and that's the business logic. So this is where APIs comes into picture. For example, Make My Trip making a call to BA's API or to any other airline's API. So this centerpiece of core logic is the business layer, and this is the API layer. And the last layer, but the deepest layer, is the data layer or the database. For example, when you try to get yourself registered to Make My Trip, your user details goes into the DB. So this database validation goes on the database layer or the server layer. So while I was explaining these three layers, you might have known like how important is a business layer and a DB layer. So it's very important because these layers are not seen by the users. The user doesn't have an option to see what's inside these layers, the business logic that's happening here. But as a test engineer, validating these two layers is like more challenging than testing the front end. So this is actually backend testing or black box testing where this comes to picture. So testing an API, I would say like is something really important a test engineer should do at a very early stage of the product's life cycle. Because like intense testing done here, which is the core of that application, helps us really have confidence in the logic. And it also helps us to make sure that the requirement is actually working as expected, even before the application is going to have a front end. So any bug that we find here at an API testing level will help us to fix the bug early and have a better and robust application, because it is very difficult and really time consuming to actually identify a backend bug or a bug in the API when we actually go and see it from the front end. So it's nearly impossible to do that because it takes a lot of time backtracking where it comes from. So yeah, so having talked so much about APIs and API testing, now we have this question of how do we even test it? Or how do testers test the APIs in the current world? So as a matter of fact, we can see that not every test engineer has got API testing skill set or knowledge about APIs. So to actually train a test engineer for backend testing, it's really time consuming and it's actually costly and expensive in the current world. So because we actually use tools for API testing, naming few of the market tools like Swagger or Postman or Soap UI to test APIs. So you can pick any of these tools, name any of this tool. You'll have to do so much of test planning and you'll have to work so much in setting up the data into these tools, which is really a lot time consuming, more than the actual testing itself. For example, in any of these third-party tools for API testing, you will have to create a test with all your request header fields. Like you'll have to give your URL, you'll have to give your authentication type, your content type, your API key, your secret. You have to really generate your token every time you want to run an API scenario, and then give your request payload, and then you'll have to send a request. And finally, you will see a response status and a body. All this is a manual validation. It really takes a lot of time to generate tokens each and every time. It's like I mean, this is really a challenge to a test engineer creating tokens every time. I am many times fed up with this part in all these third-party tools. So even after all this manual validation, what I'll have to do is like, I'll have to go and I'll have to maintain a collection for each of these API projects with all the API endpoints and all the methods for each endpoints in my API testing tool. To make it more reusable, I'll have to set the environment variable, which is nothing but, as you know, a set of constants like your URL, your API key, secret, your user ID and password, all these credentials which are never going to change. These constants have to be set as environment variables in these third-party tools. And then it enables us to reuse in the future test cycles. So you can see how much of work goes in testing a single API scenario. You'll have to generate tokens manually each time, and you'll have to give this token to test the API scenario. This is definitely not simple, I think. So this is when I really felt like as a test engineer, Testenium was really helping me big time. So in Testenium, for the same API testing, Testenium has got such a nice user interface that will help anyone to input your URL, your payload. Again, the payload can be the entire JSON payload, or you can also have them added like in a one-to-one fashion, like field to value in the Testenium's UI. And then you give your user ID, password, or any such credentials, maybe API key and secret, etc. And you also have this lovely UI which enables us to give the URL from where the token is to be fetched from. Because in any third-party tool, you'll have to generate the token and give the token for testing. But in Testenium, you have a URL field where it gets the URL and it actually fetches the token during the execution. So in fraction of seconds, it computes the data. The token is fetched from the authentication service and it's applied for authentication, and it gives you results, the response status and body, in like really milliseconds, I would say. So like the biggest advantages of this platform as a QA engineer I have seen, firstly is the time. I'd say like the speed in which I get my results is like on par with any other tool that I have used. It's like really literally milliseconds that I get my results. And also like really happy with the user-friendly UI where I can put my test data for API testing. Because as I explained in many other tools, I have had to spend like so much of time preparing the test data and putting up my test data in their UI. So Testenium has in that way made life really useful by having a very user-friendly interface. It also eliminates this big requirement of the user. I mean, not asking the user for a token every time. It just eliminates that requirement of asking a token from the user. As I said, it generates tokens from talking to the authentication service, which is really a lot of time saved at a QA site. I would also say that it's really nice to have a customizable UI for testing our APIs. Testenium has this flexible and customizable UI when we come to API testing. And not the least, I was able to see that when you use Testenium for testing your front-end services, like using the Selenium WebDriver feature, by using this feature, you get to test your front-end, but you can use the same platform for your API testing as well. But then I know in real time we can't do that, because when you use Selenium WebDriver for front-end testing, you'll have to procure a different third-party tool for your API testing or for your backend testing. But with Testenium, I think when we do front-end testing with their Selenium WebDriver feature, they also have this API testing feature which enables us to do backend testing at the same time. So this is like one monolithic platform for quality assurance that does all possible types of testing that as a QA engineer can ever imagine of. So just coming to the automation part of APIs. I know this is a very big challenge for automation test engineers to actually build and maintain a API test framework. Not only you get your test results for API scenarios from Testenium, but what Testenium does is it also gives you test scripts generated in a nice Gherkin format, in a Gherkin syntax. So as an automation test engineer, we can use these test scripts in our framework to create and maintain an API test framework within our organization. So this to me is like having both manual and automation of my API scenarios done using one platform called Testenium, which actually gives me an answer for completing the work within my sprint. It's like sprint goal actually being achievable with Testenium. So I'd say like we cannot, I mean, we can just eliminate this huge backlog we have with automation. So because it's like very easy to manually test and actually have the test scripts running behind that can be used for automation. So you can simply pick those test scripts and use them for automation, and you can achieve your sprint goal of actually manually testing a user story and also automating it within the same sprint. So with Testenium, you can test all your APIs, all the methods like the get, post, put, patch, delete, using their nice, simple user interface. And you just get your test results within milliseconds, as I said. And also your test scripts in given, when, then format. So I was just really a happy experience with using Testenium for my API testing. And I would say like this is really like a very good friend for every test engineer, because it has like a very nice customizable UI, and it doesn't have it doesn't ask the user to generate token. It does it automatically. The speed and like everything, I would say like one platform which helps us to test everything, like from the front end to the back end APIs. And I'd say like that is like a delight to a test engineer, which saves time and a lot of coding effort that goes in. So yeah, I'm like a very happy user, and I'm really looking forward to use it in my organization. And
Thank you.
yeah, we'll just have any questions after Dr. Aras's demo now. I'm looking forward to look into Doctor's demo as well. So yeah, thank you, Ed and Dr. Aras and the team for giving me